Babylonian temple, that's another saying, you know what? I've defeated your gods. Because during these days, that's what they believed. When they won a victory, what did they believe? They believed their God was stronger than the God of the Hebrews. Okay? But we're going to see that that's going to all change. In other words, God is going to be with them even in captivity. So, and that is so exciting because think about how Daniel. Yes, go ahead.
I was just wondering, are those the ones that were thrown in the fire and didn't burn up?
Yes. Yes. See, there you go. And see, but now that's how we know them. Okay. Daniel was given the name what? Belshazzar. Okay. And they have meanings as well. Hananiah was given the name Shadrach. Mishael was given the name Meshach, and Azariah was given the name what? Abednego. But when we get to the fiery furnace, chapter 3, and that's a very important chapter, okay? I want you to remember their Hebrew names. I want you to remember the Lord is gracious.
It's interesting because when we used to have Sunday school,
Mhm.
and I would walk around to different Sunday school classes to see
Right.
what was being taught, and the young lady was teaching the junior class,
Right.
and she was talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I said, well, that's their Babylonian name. What's their Hebrew name? She goes, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I said, no. I said, don't you know?
Right.
She says, no, Pastor. I said, then go back a couple scriptures. Haven't I always taught you what you're reading? Read back the few scriptures so you get the whole entity of what it's talking about. And
Absolutely.
it was so interesting, and I'll never forget that because she did not know. And here she
Absolutely.
was teaching the class.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes we're so focused on the Babel. And isn't that sort of like life? He was trying, what was Nebuchadnezzar through this Enoch? Remember, these people were Nebuchadnezzar's servants, if you will. They were his hired people, right? They were trying to erase. What does the world always want to do? Erase our belief in who? God. Now, I don't want to miss this. I want you to see how it all ties right in. And we're talking about Daniel. Here, his name is changed, okay? But look at verse 8. One of the most significant verses, and this sets up the whole book of Daniel. I'm not talking about prophecy, but understanding about his character. It says, but Daniel, what did he do? Purpose in his heart that he would not defile himself. Think about this. This is a 15-year-old boy, teenage boy, in a foreign land. And look, somebody read verse 8. Let's read that verse.
Unix.
Now, so wait a minute. Here is Daniel. He gets a new name, Belshazzar, and he decides he's going to stay with God. And this is not, this is not a simple thing to do. He is a slave, and he now has purpose, resolved, set firmly in his heart. He has decided. Now that's a good question for us. Have we decided that we're not turning back? That we're staying with Jesus Christ no matter what? No matter what this world tries to give us, or provide us, or pull us away, have we purposed in our heart? Here, Daniel, he does not want to. It's about change my name, Nebuchadnezzar. You can do this, but you are not getting my heart. Exactly. Exactly. And look, think about this. How many of the other Hebrew captives just went along with the program?
John, have you read the footnotes on the four names, what their names actually meant in Hebrew?
I actually, yeah.
And what they meant in,
Why don't we read them? That'd be fun, because we reviewed them a moment ago, but let's review them again.
I've got here.
Yeah, let's read it. That would be great.
Okay, the meaning of the four Hebrew names affirm God's sovereignty and God's mercy. Daniel means God is judge. Hananiah means God is gracious. Azariah means God is my help. And Mishael means who is like God. The meanings of their names contradicted the truth of their original names. Daniel becomes Belshazzar. Bel will protect. Hananiah means Shadrach, inspired of Akub. Mishael becomes Meshach, belonging to Akub. And Azariah becomes Abednego, servant of Necho. Yes, they're all little G's of the Babylonians.
And isn't it interesting that Satan always wants to take your identity away from God? You know, and think about that.
That's from Strong's, okay?
Thank you. I want you to think about, but I want you also to think about what names they have. Yes. Uh-huh.
Sure he did.
Yes. He knew exactly what he was doing because he wanted to indoctrinate. He wanted them to become like the world. He didn't want them to worry about Hebrew culture. He was trying to change them
So
completely.
Daniel quickens in his heart, I am not going to partake of the king's wines.
Right. Now,
So forth, you see. And so that's a testimony right there for us.
right.
I will not partake of the liquor, the beer, the wine, the nonsense that the world is offering because
Exactly.
I am greater than that, John.
That's a great point. Now I want to think about this. Now this goes back to a thought. Daniel is thinking here, why was the southern kingdom destroyed? Right? Think about that for a moment. Why did God allow this Nebuchadnezzar, one second, I'll withdraw, to besiege them? Allowed a God, Nebuchadnezzar, who does not believe in the one true God, besiege. Why? Absolutely. Is this predicted anywhere? Absolutely. Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Isaiah told them. Did God not send them, Jeremiah, did God not send them prophets that this exactly was going to happen? That's very key. Did God warn them? In other words, did God say, this is what's going to happen if you do such and such? And Daniel, understanding this, decides to what? Purpose it in his heart. Yeah, you might be able to change my name. I might have to learn all this foolishness. But guess what? You can't take me away from my God, my relationship. Yes, Star.
I was thinking that, he was 50.
Uh-huh.
He must have been schooled in worship of God, obedience to God.
Yes.
For him to stand so strong at age 15 in a
Right.
strange country. I mean, it's just amazing.
Well, think about this. What family was he from? that's interesting too to think about for a moment. Does this mean also, bring it to a practical point, can we still serve God? In other words, he's serving God right in enemy territory. Yeah, I mean, he has decided to serve God, even though probably this is what they were saying to him. What did your God do? Where was your God when Nebuchadnezzar was taking over Jerusalem, the southern king? Where was your God? Right? Have we ever said that? Let me ask ourselves a question. We don't have to answer out loud. But what if some of us had a difficulty with this? At our jobs, could we be faced with something of this nature? Could we, I mean, this is,
You could be the only Christian in your jobs, right? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And you gotta stand against everybody that's cursing and screaming and talking nonsense. You gotta listen to that.
now, I wonder, so one thing we're going to learn from Daniel right away, he purposed in his heart to follow his God no matter what, to the best he could do. He didn't, and we're also going to see that he was also very, so one thing I want you to realize about his character was when it came, and that's what we'll understand when we get to chapter 6, when it came to his faith in God, he wasn't bending. Yes.
That's what it says. And during the time of the Bible, as they get captive, God always keep his men and his people.
Yes.
Moses' time, kept Moses. You know what I mean? It goes on and on. But he always keep his prophet. He always keep men of God to bring his people back.
So in other words, God's purposes are always going to be fulfilled,
Yes.
even if we can't really see it. That's a good point, Roberto. So now, it's the first thing, in order to do this, now we're going to look at how he tried to go about doing this, because I think it's also interesting. So he purposed in his heart. We know that word means he what? Resolved. He decided. He was committed, right? And, now what he did is he requested of the chief eunuch. Again, that means somebody like a servant. Doesn't necessarily have to mean from the Hebrew that it necessarily was somebody who was castrated. It could. We're not going to argue that point, okay? I don't think it's all that really that relative. But it does say that he might not defile himself. Now look what it says here in verse 9. Somebody read verse 9. Verse 9.
Now God had brought Daniel into a favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs.
Now isn't that interesting? God will work to help you not defile yourself. Do you see how he needed the grace of God in order to purpose in his heart? In other words, he needed God to make a way for him to be able to do this. Does that make sense? And how did God help him to be able to make his commitment?
Favor.
Favor with who? With that chief eunuch, right? And now watch, the chief eunuch is going to tell his problem though, Watch what he says, verse 10. Somebody read it.
And then the prince of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should I see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sword? Then shall you make me a danger of my head to the king.
All right, now, I want you to start to realize that Nebuchadnezzar's character. Was he going to handle this what did he do? He killed his sons and then plucked out his eyes before he took them to Babylon, fulfilling prophecy. But what my point is, do you realize this eunuch, to do this, was taking a big risk, okay? And he's saying that, So here, Daniel, in a quiet way, is witnessing to this eunuch. Isn't it amazing how God is using this simple thing that he's going to purpose in his heart to refuse these delicacies and the wine and the food? And you think, so he's saying, hey, Nebuchadnezzar's not going to be happy with this. Who's running the show here? But it's also interesting, not really. God's running the show. Don't miss this. Don't miss that already Daniel, little 15-year-old, is saying, you know what, Nebuchadnezzar, you're not running the show. You might think you are. You might think you have all this power, but you only have the power that God has given you. Now look at his response. Look what he says. Now watch, he doesn't speak to the chief eunuch. Look what he says. So he basically heard, no, Daniel, I like you, but we can't do that. You know what I mean? I don't want to lose my head. So what does Daniel do? Watch this great, because he was a great diplomat. We're going to find out he's a statesman. He's a person that's going to be elevated in Nebuchadnezzar's, whatever you want to say, government or whatever. But watch what he does. I think our presidents could learn from this. Look what he does. He doesn't back down, but look what he does. Somebody read the verse 11 and verse 12.
Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat.
Oh, going back up one to verse 11. I'm sorry.
Daniel said to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. And let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the contentance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants.
Verse 14.
So he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days.
Okay, now, did you see what Daniel did? Very diplomat. He didn't bend completely, but he did be willing. He could have said, listen, he could have said to this chief eunuch that doesn't really know God, right? Said, hey, this is what we have to do, not care about the fact that he might lose his head. He said, no. And he didn't talk to the chief eunuch. You know who he talked to? He went and talked to the steward, a lesser guy, and said, listen, what if you did this? Let us just eat vegetables for 10 days, and if our appearance is healthier, or whatever, in other words, give us a chance. Let's test this theory out. I believe God, he trusted God so much that God was going to work it out for him. And I thought that, do you think that was a good way to handle this situation? Go to verse 15 and let's see what happens. Verse 15, Roberta, you want to read it?
At the end of 2 days, what's that?
They looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who gave the royal.
Now, okay, hold on a second. What happened after the 10 days?
They look better than the others.
They look better.
Is God in control here?
Yes.
Is God already honoring Daniel? Daniel purposed in his heart, but he needed God to help him. So hold on a second. Is God the one? When we decide to stay with God, will he give us the grace we need to carry out his will? You get what I'm trying to say? If God did not intervene here, would have Daniel been able to do this? Do you see God's hand quietly? You see that, don't you? You see his hand quietly. You see it. You see that quietly God is working what? Behind the scenes. Will he do that for you? So you don't have to compromise. Will he make a way so you don't have to compromise? So you can purpose in your heart to follow the Lord. I think that is just so amazing. And the fact that they were healthier. Now, you'll pick up some commentators who would say, well, that was probably a better diet with vegetables. Some of you would say it was God all the way, right? Is it God anyway? Who made the vegetables? You know? Now, verse 16, look what happened. I don't know if all the other people were happy with Daniel. Let's read verse 16.
And then Melzer took away the portion of their meats and wine that they should drink, and gave them false vegetables.
Do you see what happened? The steward said, hey, if this is working out well for Daniel and the 4 Hebrew boys, we're going to put everybody on this program. Is God in control? He's already. You don't think this got back to Nebuchadnezzar? You got this young Hebrew boy who decided he was not going to defile his God. He's got them all eating vegetables and not eating your delicacies. And guess what? Nebuchadnezzar went along with the program. It's just as interesting, isn't it, how God is using Daniel already preparing for the next step. Let me ask you this. If you're faithful with the small matters, is this a lesson there? If you're faithful with the small matters, is God going to give you more? It's scriptural, isn't it? What happened to the servant that he gave 10 minas to? He went and made another 10, right? The guy who gave 5 to, he made another 5. But the one that he gave basically 1 to did what? Put it in the hole in the ground? And he said, oh, I didn't make nothing. I didn't lose your mina. What did God do? Give that mina to the one that made the 10. So, Daniel, right here, I don't want you to forget, chapter 1 sets up the rest of what? The book. Because let's take a look at the next verse. Verse 17. Somebody read verse 17 and 18?
As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in the learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and all dreams.
Okay, wait, don't miss that. Now we're learning a lot about Daniel. God gave, right, all the Hebrew, the 4 of them, right? Hananiah, Mishael, and Azaniah. He gave them what? Knowledge, right? However, what does he give Daniel? This is setting up what? Is this setting up chapter 2? Daniel, you could see that he was under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, writing very well. Is there any question that Daniel was a prophet? What does it say he was given? Understanding in all visions and dreams. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Who gave this to Daniel? Don't miss that. Should Daniel walk around and say, what? Exactly. Should Daniel walk around and say, oh, I'm a prophet and no. He knows who he got the gift from. And he's going to be very clear about it in front of King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, that's a very important, highlight that for chapter 2. God's going to start to elevate this young man. His anointing, God has a hand on this young man that has purpose not to defile himself against the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, right? Now, look what it says, verse 19. Oh, I apologize. Go to verse 18. I don't think we did that. Now let's see, verse 18, 19. Let's read verse 18, 19, and 20. Don't read verse 21 yet. I want to get there. So can somebody read those for me? 18, 19, and 20? Look at that. Yes.
It must have been peas. Because my mom said if I eat my peas, I'll be brain smart.
There you go. There you go. It wasn't spinach for Popeye, right? That makes you strong. But isn't it interesting that that one decision to not defile himself, God used it to elevate not just him, but his friends. You know, it's a big, and now, not just that, it says, when it says 10 times, it's like 10 hands, like it's a lot better. In other words, already King Nebuchadnezzar, think about who this king is at this moment. This is the king that has conquered the whole known world at the time. He is king of Babylon. Here, God is making talk about favor, is giving Daniel and his friends favor with the king. So, yes, God allowed them to go into captivity. God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to besiege, but really, has God ever given up, as Pastor said, his sovereignty? Is God still showing himself sovereign? Right in the first chapter. So, if you were reading Daniel and you know that you were brought into captivity, you're realizing, wait a minute, God has done something great here. In other words, God is also getting the attention of the Babylonians. Do you think God cares about the Babylonians? Do you think God is interested in the Babylonians and their salvation? We're going to see that there's going to be a relationship that develops over time with Daniel and King Nebuchadnezzar. Now you will see some places, some scriptures call him King Nebuchadnezzar, but we're going to keep to call him King Nebuchadnezzar because we know that, okay? We're familiar with it. But that's who they, so if you see that, they're talking about the same person, all right? It's not a big deal. Sometimes you, what? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. Thank you. Good point. Why is he called that? They felt that that was, some of the people that have translated the Bible felt that was more of his name. It's all because of how it was pronounced. Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadrezzar, they sound very similar, so it kind of, but a lot, like here you're seeing Nebuchadnezzar, yeah, so there's not really a big, I want you to realize that we're talking about the same person, all right? Does that make sense to you? But that's a good, oh, that's another, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad you just brought this up.
He changed their names, he changed their language.
You actually, very important, if you actually look at the book of Daniel in the original, okay, going back, now we mentioned the Septuagint, but we're talking about the scriptures before that. This was not written, it's Old Testament. What language do we assume this is written in? Believe it or not, the first 7 chapters to about verse 2 of chapter 7, which is interesting because we're talking about the Gentiles, the time of the Gentiles. It's written what? In Aramaic, and then it'll switch over to the Hebrew. But that's an interesting point. You're not going to get that in the English. Not so important. But why is that important? We're going to see in chapter 4, right, that King Nebuchadnezzar makes a very powerful statement to the whole world. You realize that's King Nebuchadnezzar making his statement after something happens, but we don't want to get too ahead of the game. This is a great book. Now don't miss this. They are elevated at this point after their 3 years of training. Okay? Now watch verse 21. It says, this Daniel continued unto the first year of the king of Cyrus. That does not mean he didn't go a little bit past that. Don't get all wrapped up in that. Some critics do. It doesn't really matter again. But what's important here, he went through 2 empires. He served under 2 empires. Ain't that incredible? He's a statesman. Also, I want you to realize that Daniel was a statesman. And we're going to see that. He became very powerful in the Babylonian Empire, and he became very powerful in the Persian Empire. But I want you to see and watch that. He never lost what?
According
Yes.
to Strong,
Mm-hmm.
Daniel was a nobleman of Israel, possibly a prince, who was taken to Babylon in the first deportation, 605 BC.
Absolutely, yes. When you we actually went in. We went into because the first verse, but that isn't. See, you see 6. That's a very important year. 605 BC. Why? There's going to be other deportations. Know this: the temple at this point has not been destroyed.
Give the last dated prophecy, it's 536.
Yeah, give that, please. I didn't give that.
The meaning of, excuse me, I'm sorry. His ministry lasted the entire length of the Babylonian exile. His last dated prophecy being made in 536 BC, when Daniel was in his 80s.
Ain't that incredible? Ain't that incredible? Are you hearing that this and
Now, here's something that's interesting that I've read this, but it didn't click till just now. Daniel is probably the most highly organized book in Scripture. Some attribute this to the fact that near the end of his life, Daniel rewrote and organized the whole book into one consolidated message. The intricate arrangement of the ideas in the book demonstrates the extraordinary wisdom of Daniel.
absolutely? It's one of the what he's saying, it's a very organized prophecy, and we'll see that. He also is very compact. The Holy Spirit's very
We could say he dotted his
Right.
I's and crossed his T's and made sure.
The other thing too is, you notice God used, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he used the person's personality. He used those, you know what, in the scriptures. You know what I mean? Amos was a sheep herder, right? Daniel was a statesman. But guess what? God used him to get his message across, which means God can use all of us, you know. Now, one thing I also want you to recognize when we get to chapter 6, they couldn't question Daniel's what? Integrity. So we're going to see that Daniel is a very good person who really, God really, hand was really on his life. and what God can do with you when you follow God. Does that make sense? Now, chapter 2 is exciting. We won't get into it tonight. We're going to do that. Chapter 2 is going to set up pretty much all of history. Now, what did critics say against Daniel? Remember? That it was too, what? Historically accurate, that he had to write this after the fact. We're going to next week, so please read chapter 2, okay? We went over it during the Revelation thing, right, when we did the book of Revelation. Why is chapter 2 so important? It's going to go over the kingdoms that are going to rise on this earth.
What we're going to find, John, is the book of Daniel is going to give you so many similarities on the book of Revelation.
Yes. We'll be popping back in there, which is I'm excited about, because we'll be doing some reviewing. And that's why one of the reasons I picked Daniel is for that reason. But not just that, too. I also like his what? Getting to know him. Really, the first 6 chapters, we're going to get to know him really well. What's exciting about the first, don't think they're not prophetic. I disagree with some of the commentaries you will read. They'll say, oh, they're not really prophetic. They're more prophetic than you could imagine. But I am really excited about the miracles that take place. Is God the same God as he was then? If God, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I'm praying, first of all, this miracle, chapter 1, he purposed in his heart, and God honored him and elevated him and let him make his commitment not to defile himself. Chapter 2, God gives him interpretation of the dream, and everybody would have been killed if they didn't do that. Chapter 3 is one of the most famous. Anybody who's read the Bible, Kim, don't you ever read chapter 3? When you're down, your faith is low, don't you get excited about reading chapter 3? They protect them, what? In the fiery furnace. Isn't that one of the greatest miracles in the Bible? You could talk to a lot of people. Did they know that miracle? Shadrach, what? Meshach, and Abednego? You sing the song? Chapter 4 is so great. Why? The pride of the king is going to be brought low. I love chapter 5. The handwriting, look at that. We have that in our own language. The handwriting is what? On the wall. And then I love chapter 6. He shut the mouth of lions. And we'll pop into Hebrew what? What chapter in Hebrews we will pop into when going through the book of Daniel? Chapter what? The faith chapter. Which one is it? Chapter 11. Did you say 11? I didn't hear it. Yes. So listen. Also, this is a great book to pray through. That encourages you when you pray. If they protected over Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, can he protect you through any fiery furnace? Don't listen. Just because it's an Old Testament book, Jesus Christ is all in this book. Please, remember we talked about that. Can we find Jesus all through the book? Daniel makes a prophecy that he prophesies to the day that Jesus will ride through Jerusalem and declare himself as king. To the day. So we'll deal with that. This is an exciting book. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about. So as we close here tonight, can anybody share something that encouraged you tonight? This was a very encouraging chapter. Not too much crazy, right? Like some of the chapters in Revelation, but we went through, believe it or not, because it was a good story. What encouraged you tonight about Daniel chapter 1? Yes, Roberto.
That God used that in a simple way. He didn't make a big miracle for them to do side. He just used his wisdom, his mind, because he made a deal
Yes?
Okay, let me get this, and then after the 10 days, you let me know who looks better, and they accept it. So that was simple. It wasn't a big, blown out, big thing. It was just a simple
Yes.
way of God using his kid.
Thank you, Roberta. That was good. Somebody else? Something you got out of this, thought about? Yes, Kim?
Encourages us to know that no matter what we're going through, God's always with us.
Amen. Anybody else? All right, Pastor, you going to close us in prayer?
Father, thank you for this wonderful Bible study this evening. Thank you for each and every one that is here. Guide us, direct us in all of thy ways, Lord. Bring us back to that day this coming Sunday, if you tarry, Lord. If
Yes,
not,
Lord.
we'll be around your throne room. In Jesus' name.
Jesus.
Everybody have a good Fourth tomorrow. Be safe. Take care of yourselves. Christine and I are driving back tonight because our daughter is having a shindig at her place.
All right.
So we're going to put on fireworks, finger foods, witty fingers. I guess.
And you guys be safe too.
Christine got a phone call, Mom, can you make cookies?
Oh, okay.